Okay, it should be
Okay.
recording now.
Yeah. All right. Thank you, Dr. Holden, for joining us today for this interview.
Thank you.
Firstly, we would ask you to like briefly introduce yourself and what you've done throughout your career.
Yeah, sure. So I'm Dr. Tom Holden. I'm the AP and IB biology teacher at Shanghai American School. I've been there for 6 years, and before that I was teaching science in Bangkok. And so I've always been, in my teaching career, an international educator. And then in terms of studies, my undergraduate degree is in molecular biology and genetics from Royal Holloway University of London, which is just in the southwest part of London. And then my PhD from UCL, University College London, is in neuroscience, specifically cellular neurophysiology.
Okay, so moving into the first question, which takes us back to like the beginning of your school life and university life. So you mentioned that you studied you had your PhD in neurobiology and your undergraduate degree. So is there were those the only courses you took during university?
Yeah, basically. I mean, the molecular biology and genetics is a full 3-year program. You take around 8 modules per year on various aspects of biochemistry, cell biology, molecular biology, genetics, and so on. And then the PhD took a little bit over 5 years to complete.
Mm-hmm.
So about 4.5 years of active research and then a year to write up the thesis.
Oh. And were you always interested in the topics that you've majored in? And then like what sparked your interest for these topics?
Yeah, I think a similar age and stage of high school that you guys are at now. I mean, in the UK we take A levels, but it's the A level program similar to IB in a lot of ways. It's a 2-year program. The course structure, there's a lot of parallels. It was just easily my favorite subject at A level. I really enjoyed the experiments. I enjoyed the dissections. I liked chemistry as well, but I just felt more drawn to biology. And it's difficult to really know what you want to study, I think, when you're like 17, 18. You have to make these huge life decisions. And you're still trying to figure out who you are and so on. But I felt really drawn to biology, and so that's why I applied for that as my undergraduate program.
What was it like studying your chosen subjects in college? Like, what was an interesting experience, and what were some things that these courses taught you?
I think there was a lot of difference between my undergraduate program and my PhD. They're just worlds apart. The undergraduate program is, a bit more like an extension of high school. You're much more specialized. Obviously, the subject material is much more challenging and advanced, and you're really immersed in this one field, but it's still like learning material. There's structures with the semester. You do exams, you get grades. And then you transition to the PhD, and that's completely not like that. It's far more like having a job, and there's not really so much structure in terms of the year. You don't get grades, and it's just, you're in the lab working. It's much more self-directed and unstructured, which came as kind of a surprise, the extent to which it's like that. And yeah, just much more like having a job, and you're producing data, you're doing these very advanced experiments. You need to be very, very independent. And you need to teach yourself a lot of things. So I'd say undergraduate and PhD, there's a lot of contrast between just the day-to-day and the week-to-week feel of what it's like.
And so out of all the majors that you took, like what did you find the most interesting throughout your experience?
Yeah, I mean, I think when I got really drawn to neuroscience was in year 2 of my undergraduate program at Royal Holloway, and there was a module called receptors, hormones, and neurotransmitters, and I just felt really engaged with it. It's just fascinating, like all these chemical signals and how they control so many things in the body. The idea of how a synapse functions and synaptic plasticity and how learning and memory works and how we can form these incredibly deep and complex memories that persist for a whole lifetime. And you guys have done the brain dissection by now in my course, and I just think the disparity between what the brain looks like when you dissect it, I mean, it's kind of unimpressive, right? When you're cutting into the brain. Just looks like
Yeah.
a grey jelly. Yet what's actually going on in there and what the brain can produce in terms of memories and emotions and thoughts and so on is pretty amazing.
Mm-hmm.
Mm. So were there any like specific reasons that helped you make your decisions into taking the subjects you took? So like any specific reasons that helped you choose neurobiology as your PhD?
Yeah, like that basically, that module that I took in year 2. And also, you know, wanting to continue with studying rather than just getting a job. I felt at the end of my undergraduate program, I didn't really know what job I'd want to do at that point. So it was a way of avoiding getting a job, although actually the PhD is far more work and far more demanding than most jobs and less well paid.
Yeah. And
Yeah.
when you were getting your PhD and like your degree, what was like the greatest challenge that you've experienced?
I think the degree is just, you know, just challenging exams, really, and just the sheer amount of complex material you have to learn. You already had a sense of that from IB Biology HL. Yeah, just the sheer volume of material you need to know, the complexity of it, keeping it all in your mind, being able to write scientifically and articulate your ideas clearly, I think. And then the PhD is extremely challenging. Like I said, you have to be very, very independent. You're kind of very on your own. It's like sink or swim. And I've known people who quit the program just because it's just too much for them. The hours are long. There's a lot of frustration in research, and you've probably seen that already with your practice IA. Like you do everything right and you set up, but somehow it doesn't work. You don't get the results you were expecting. And like I'm always saying in class, you know, a lot of research is just troubleshooting and fixing technical problems. It's not like you go in and just make these amazing scientific discoveries. Unfortunately, it really doesn't work like that. And it was shocking to me how often things don't work out the way you want and how much time you're spending just resolving problems as opposed to gathering data and making discoveries.
Mm-hmm. And then like the stuff you learned in college, other than like the content itself, was there anything else that helped you prepare for the real world?
I mean, the other thing I learned apart from content a lot, you know, was practical techniques and working in the lab, getting really good with your hands. And I learned various advanced experimental techniques in my PhD. I did brain surgery on rats and implanted electrodes into the brain of the rat, and you have to anesthetize it. You perform this 2 or 3 hour surgery, and then the rat wakes up and you let it recover. You can actually plug the rat into this recording system, and you're recording from single neurons in an awake behaving animal, and it's running around this maze. It's got this thing implanted on top of its skull, and it's literally plugged into this recording system. And the surgery there, like doing brain surgery, is pretty challenging anyway, but obviously a rat's brain is pretty small, so that kind of adds to the challenge. And various other, you know, technical skills. But in terms of preparing for life, you know, no, actually, I feel like university, at least for me, didn't really prepare me for the career world or the world of work. And when I did go into the world of work, it was kind of a transition. And like in terms of just knowing what it's like to work in a professional environment and the expectations and so on, I don't think I really got that a lot from university. And that's because you're basically, you know, like now at high school, like you're just out for yourself. You know, you're just responsible for your own work, for your own performance. Sometimes there's group projects, but, you know, mostly it's just you on your own. And then suddenly you're working as part of a team in a professional environment, and it's quite difficult. I guess the other thing I learned from university is like scientific writing, data analysis, all these kinds of skills, which are very transferable in lots of different ways.
What are some things you wished you learned in college that helped you prepare for a real world and looking for a job?
Yeah, kind of that really, like working in a professional environment, being part of a team, being used to the demands of the world of work and what it's like to be in a career, because I feel that's really quite different from university, and it takes a while to adjust to that, I think, for most graduates. And so I think there could be more done to prepare students for the world of work, as opposed to just you learn all this stuff, but it's not so much connected with anything in the world that you're going to move on to next.
And obviously, like the PhD that you pursued is an extremely like demanding and challenging task. And what, like, is there anything that motivated you to like pursue PhD as your goal?
Yeah, I think, like I said, just not really wanting to get a job at the end of my undergraduate program, not really knowing what I want to do next, and yeah, being fascinated by how the brain works and just not wanting to stop learning and exploring at that stage. So yeah, it was really just a desire to learn more. But as I say, the PhD, I mean, it was very rewarding and fascinating in many ways, but it wasn't. I thought it was just going to be like a continuation of my undergraduate program and just more and more learning. And it's not like that. It's more like a job, and you're expected to produce data as well as learning. But the learning you do on your own time. Like, nobody teaches you stuff. You're just reading scientific papers, and it's completely from yourself and independent.
You mentioned that you did some experimentation on rats, and they're implanting some sort of brain control thing in their skull. Could you tell us more about like your time in the PhD area, and like what other experiences you faced during that time?
Sure. So, obviously, we know how neurons work, and if you want to record their activity, really, you got to do electrical recordings. And so, yeah, one way I described was to record from the rat, and it's actually, pretty rare to be able to get recordings from an awake animal that's behaving, and you have to do this invasive surgery to its brain. The other main technique I used was called patch clamp electrophysiology, and so there you would take the brain out of the rat, having given it a terminal overdose first so it doesn't suffer, and then you remove the brain. You dissect out a part of the brain called the hippocampus. You put it in a machine called a vibratome, which cuts in incredibly thin slices, about 300 microns in thickness. You're doing all this in a physiological solution. And so the cells will stay alive. All the neurons and the other cells, like glial cells, will stay alive for maybe 10 or 12 hours. And if you section the hippocampus in the right plane, in the right 3D orientation, all the networks of synapses and connections and neural pathways are still intact. So you take this tiny slice of brain, you put it in a very high-end microscope and recording system, and you can actually put electrodes into the brain tissue and record from single neurons. And then you can stimulate pathways with tiny electrical pulses, and it's very high resolution recording. I mean, there's 100 billion neurons in the human brain, so to record from single neurons with high precision is pretty amazing. Then you can apply various drugs and compounds to block different types of receptors, different types of voltage-gated ion channels, and so on. And you can manipulate the experiment in all kinds of different ways.
Mm-hmm. And then obviously, like, you have a lot of experience in the scientific field. And then for students who want to pursue a career in the scientific field, is there any advice you want to give them?
I think try as far as possible to have a clear idea of where you want your career to go. So it's great to follow your passion. Wow, I love biology or whatever science, and study that at university. Try to at least try to map out your career. Try to think what you actually want your job to be like after university, and that can actually help with selecting your major and selecting your course modules. And even more than the subject that you choose, I always say to students, you should ask yourself what you actually want your day job to be like. Mm-hmm. And that's a more fundamental thing. Do you want to work in an office? Do you want to work in a lab? Do you want to just live in one place and work in one place? Or do you want to travel a lot? Do you want to work on your own, or do you want to be part of a team? Do you want to have a lot of responsibility and manage other people, or do you not want to do that? And all these kind of fundamental things will help you to figure out what kind of career is going to work for you.
And then were these like the reasons that helped you decide to become a teacher?
Yeah, to an extent. And I think just still really not being sure what I wanted to do. As I went through my PhD, I found actually that career wasn't really for me. I found it quite isolating, quite lonely. And even though what you're doing every day is amazing in terms of being advanced, it still becomes repetitive after a few years. And, like I said, the frustration level of things not working is really high, and it's hard to deal with. Like imagine you're doing your IA and you just go in day after day after day after day and just nothing works. You don't get data. and it becomes a bit disheartening. And it's great when you do get the data, but for me, it didn't really work. So then I worked in the corporate world for a little while, for about 3 years in the pharmaceutical industry. Kind of like the management speak and the kind of personalities in there didn't really work at all. So I just wanted to try something really different, and that's how I got into education.
So if you were not in the current like teaching job that you are in now, what other job do you see yourself in?
Not sure, to be honest, because I really like this career and I finally found I really enjoy. I'd enjoy university lecturing, but the problem with teaching at university is you also have to run a lab, and you're a researcher first and a teacher second, and all the responsibility of running the lab. It has all the problems that I just described.
Mm-hmm. And then, like, what's the like most memorable moment throughout your university experience?
I think when I actually started to really master the techniques I was using in the PhD and actually started to generate data, and that feeling of discovering something that no one's ever known before is pretty profound in terms of how the brain functions and how synapses work. And you're just sitting there and you're making these recordings, you analyze your data and graph it, and you see this thing affects this other thing in this way, and it's like nobody's ever known that before. And that feeling's pretty cool. Getting the paper published, I published my research in the journal Neuropharmacology, and that's pretty awesome as well to publish in a decent, high impact neuroscience journal.
As you were in like the studying or like university aspect of life for quite a long time, you probably would have experienced setbacks and challenges. So what is like one major setback or a problem that you've experienced that help you overcome challenges now?
Yeah, I think just like I say, going through those times in the PhD when you're not getting data, your experiments just aren't working, you got to just troubleshoot. It's going to take a long time. Just having the inner strength to kind of get through those periods where it's tough and where it's challenging, and knowing that you'll get through it, but having the mental will to actually be able to do that and to keep going. And then the graduate degree that you guys are already kind of familiar with, just a lot of deadlines, a lot of assignments, a lot of work, a lot of challenging exams, and just keeping yourself motivated through those challenging times and kind of believing in yourself that you're going to succeed.
All right, that's all the questions we have for you today, Dr. Holden. We really appreciate you coming out to do this interview with us.
Sure. Yep, happy to do it, no problem. And I like what you're doing with your CAS project. I think it's cool. And like I say, I watched the interview with your father, Jordan, and yeah, it's an interesting and novel take on CAS. So well done.
All right. Well, thank you so much for the past year, and